uncover the deepest secrets of ancient Egypt and the divine sovereignty that shaped the destiny of empires. Prepare for a journey that transcends time and logic, where the great stories of the Bible come to life in an epic and emotional way. Imagine yourself in the heart of ancient Egypt, under the relentless desert sun, where life and death intertwined in complex rituals and profound beliefs. For the pharaohs, the tomb was not an end, but a portal to eternity, guarded by secrets and, as many believed, by impenetrable curses. But what if the true mummy's curse wasn't just a superstition, but a powerful reflection of a divine justice that extended beyond life and death? For centuries, Egypt has fascinated historians and archaeologists. They seek to unravel the mysteries of a civilization that erected monuments defying our understanding to this day. However, behind the grandeur, there is an even deeper narrative. Divine interference in the destinies of pharaohs and nations, intricately woven with the biblical narrative of Israel's liberation. What do history and archaeology reveal to us about this intervention that transformed the course of humanity? We are not talking about isolated myths, but events that, when examined in a new light, reveal the unmistakable hand of the Almighty on the stage of human history. For the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, the events that culminated in Israel's liberation were not mere historical coincidences, but the explicit manifestation of God's power over an empire. He saw divine providence actively working, rewriting the destiny of an oppressed people and challenging the arrogance of an empire. This often overlooked perspective invites us to go beyond the surface, to question what truly propelled the downfall of one of the greatest civilizations of the ancient world and the emergence of a predestined nation. The curse of the pharaohs is a recurring theme, often portrayed as a superstition about mummies and artifacts. But what most people miss is underestimating the power of belief in divine justice that permeated the ancient Egyptian mindset. It wasn't a foolish legend, but a reflection of the deep faith that the gods, or in this context, the true God, would intervene to punish those who desecrated the sacred. The hidden flaw in understanding Egyptian funerary rituals lies precisely there, in the underestimation of the impact that this belief in divine curse had on the psyche of an entire people. It was a system of faith and fear, where the desecration of the divine could bring terrible consequences, not only in this life, but in eternity. Archaeology, in turn, while seeking rational explanations, sometimes reveals inexplicable events that defy secular logic. Layers of destruction, abrupt climate changes, and sudden social collapses often coincide with periods of intense divine intervention in the biblical narrative. How can we reconcile scientific discoveries with descriptions of supernatural phenomena? Where does faith meet historical evidence to unravel divine purpose? A simple test to know if you are on the right track to understand this is to observe the persistence of collective memory about these events, even after millennia. Egyptian history, with its complexity, often reveals gaps that can only be filled by the action of a greater power, a divine engineer who orchestrated every detail. Think of the metaphor of the Nile. Just as its waters brought life and fertility to Egypt, controlling the destiny of civilization, ancient Egypt was also the stage for divine manifestations so powerful that they transformed not only the destiny of pharaohs and nations, but the course of all human history. The annual flooding of the Nile was vital, but the wave of supernatural events that struck Egypt during the Exodus was of a magnitude that would change everything forever. The 10 plagues of Egypt are often debated as mere natural phenomena, perhaps exacerbated by climatic conditions. But this is a reading that fails to capture the inexplicable mystery behind them. They were not coincidences, but orchestrated acts of unprecedented divine engineering, each designed to dismantle not only the Egyptian infrastructure, but also their complex polytheistic theology, humiliating each of their gods before the one true God. Imagine the logistical concept behind this: the transformation of water into blood, the infestation of frogs, lice, and flies, the plague on livestock, the boils, the hail, the swarms of locusts, the darkness, and finally, the death of the firstborn. Each plague not only caused chaos, but completely disrupted the Egyptian infrastructure, from water and food supply to public health and mobility. It was a strategic blow from divine power, designed to show the omnipotence of the Lord and the fragility of Egyptian idols. Exodus 7:12 details this relentless sequence, where each plague increased the pressure on Pharaoh and his people. The counterintuitive revelation here is why Pharaoh's hardened heart was crucial for the full manifestation of God's glory. His refusal to free Israel, even in the face of overwhelming evidence, allowed the divine intervention to unfold in all its power, serving as an eternal testimony to the sovereignty of God. The shocking consequence of this refusal was the ruin of an entire nation, devastated by the spiritual blindness of its leader. How many times in history and in our own lives do stubbornness and the arrogance of not bowing to divine will lead to catastrophic results? The fatal error many make is the attempt to control divine timing versus surrender to God's sovereignty. Pharaoh tried to negotiate, to procrastinate, but God's agenda was unshakable. The biblical account of the plagues, Exodus 7-12, serves as a dramatic case study of divine omnipotence over an established empire, showing that no earthly power can oppose the will of the Creator. The crossing of the Red Sea is one of the most iconic and challenging events for human comprehension. How did millions of people, with their animals and belongings, cross a sea in record time? The biblical narrative does not speak of an easy crossing, but of a colossal miracle, a logistical challenge that would defy even modern technology and engineering. Imagine the multitude, the short time, the water dividing into walls. It's a scenario that transcends human organizational capacity. The hidden flaw in the Egyptian military plan lies in their arrogance. Pharaoh and his army, driven by rage and a desire for revenge, blindly followed a greater power they could not comprehend, the God of Israel himself. This arrogance led to their own destruction, with the waters of the sea closing over them, sealing the fate of an empire that opposed the Creator. It was not a tactical error, but a direct consequence of defying divine power. The key factor that determined the success of this crossing was not Israel's strength, nor Moses' strategic genius, but the direct and supernatural intervention of God. He not only parted the sea, but kept it divided, allowing his people to pass on dry ground. The pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire, which guided them, were the tangible presence of his sovereignty. Why is this mindset crucial for us today? The understanding that at times, the solution to our greatest dilemmas lies beyond the human in divine action. There are moments when human effort, however well-intentioned, is insufficient. It is in these moments that faith in the intervention of the Almighty becomes the only anchor, a reminder that God can open paths where there are none. Think of the analogy of the divine architect. Just as an engineer plans a bridge over an impassable chasm, God opened a way in the midst of the unthinkable. He not only created the universe, but also subverted it to save his people. This refers us to the ancient wisdom about divine patience and the right time for the manifestation of miracles. God acts on his own timeline, and his intervention, though sometimes delayed in our perception, is always precise and powerful. After the miraculous liberation from Egypt, Israel's journey continued, culminating in the conquest of the Promised Land. One of the most controversial and fascinating episodes is the destruction of Jericho. What does science say about the collapse of these colossal walls? Surprisingly, Archaeology, in many respects, corroborates biblical narratives of inexplicable wall collapses, suggesting that something beyond conventional military strategy was at play. Evidence of rapid and horizontal collapse of the walls and the burning of the city align with the biblical account of a sudden and complete event. The subtle signs that faith was at stake are clear. Obedience to divine strategies, even when they seem illogical from a human perspective, is fundamental. Marching around a fortified city for 7 days, blowing trumpets and shouting, defies any conventional military logic. However, Israel's total obedience was the catalyst for the miracle. There is a persistent myth about the conquest of the Promised Land, the idea that it was solely a human effort. However, Scripture and archaeological evidence suggest that it was the fulfillment of a divine promise through supernatural events. It was not Israel's brute force, but the manifestation of God's justice and power that guaranteed victory. The surprising factor that sabotaged the mission at other times was not the enemy's strength, but the disobedience and lack of faith of the people of Israel themselves. Episodes like that of Achan in Jericho, where individual greed led to collective defeat, demonstrate that faithfulness to God was the key to the success of the divine undertaking. The metaphor of the siege, just as Jericho was brought down by a divine strategy, seemingly insurmountable barriers in our lives can also crumble through unwavering faith and obedience. The story of Jericho is a powerful reminder that God has methods that transcend our understanding and that trust in Him is true strength. Scholars like Ron Wyatt have made archaeological discoveries that many consider to point to the veracity of biblical accounts, such as the crossing of the Red Sea or the fall of Jericho. His claims, though sometimes controversial, raise important questions about the intersection between faith and evidence, inviting us to consider that the divine is more intertwined with the historical than traditional science may admit. Egypt, once the most powerful empire on earth, succumbed spectacularly. The never-explained divine vengeance in purely human terms echoes through millennia. The spiritual and historical consequences of defying God's purpose were not limited to the Red Sea or the plagues. They shaped the destiny of nations and empires. The fall of Egypt is a testimony that no earthly power is absolute before the Almighty. The hidden error that sabotages our faith today is disbelief in past divine interventions. If we see biblical miracles as mere stories, we prevent ourselves from seeing God's hand at work in the present. This disconnection blinds us to God's sovereignty in our own lives and in the world around us. Why can silence be more powerful than a scream? God's patience before acting is one of the deepest mysteries. He observes, allows choices to be made, but when He acts, the impact is profound and transformative. This patience is not indifference, but part of a larger divine plan, where every action and inaction has an eternal purpose. Consider a mental model for transmuting anxiety into divine intention, the confidence that God is in control, even amidst chaos and uncertainty. Instead of surrendering to anxiety in the face of challenges, we can channel that energy into faith, prayer, and seeking divine will. If God's sovereignty manifested so overwhelmingly in Egypt, wouldn't it be reasonable to believe that He still holds control over every aspect of our lives? The dissonance between faith and secular evidence is overcome when we understand that divine intervention is not limited to the distant past, but is a continuous reality for those who believe. The echo of divine vengeance resonates from the sands of Egypt and the walls of Jericho, bringing timeless lessons for contemporary life. The story of the Pharaohs, of their arrogance and their fall, serves as a solemn reminder of the importance of recognizing God's sovereignty. In a world that often bows to modern idols, be they power, money, technology, or human reason itself, ancient narratives warn us about the consequences of defying the Creator. The promise of benefit from understanding these mysteries is clear. Instead of living in uncertainty, faith in the epic events of the past can strengthen our faith and bring clarity in times of uncertainty. The hand that parted the Red Sea and brought down the walls of Jericho is the same hand that can guide us through life's storms. The liberation of Israel, led by Moses, remains an eternal testimony to God's power over nations and human challenges. It was not just the liberation of a people, but the proclamation of a universal truth, that there is a God in heaven who intervenes in history, who honors his promises, and who demands faithfulness. May we, like Israel, learn the lesson of unwavering obedience, faith, and trust in a God who is, and always will be, Lord over all. May your life be a living testament to this transformative power.